the word Epiphany means manifestation or appearance. So it isn't a word tied directly to the notion of three kings coming to see Jesus or three magi from the east. It's really an idea that we attach this story of the three wise men coming, or the wise men coming. I don't even know if there were three. I think there were three because there were three gifts. The Eastern Church thinks of them as 12 because it represents the 12 tribes of Israel. But the idea of manifestation or appearance really is attached to a number of different early stories of Jesus. It refers to several streams of tradition that basically hang on a couple of different stories. Our tradition is the visit of the Magi. These were scholars or astrologers from Persia, perhaps. And they saw this great light in the sky, and they traveled for days in order to arrive at where they thought this star really had beckoned them to come to. And so they went to see Herod, a tyrant of a ruler, to ask him where his child was to be born. He became troubled, and so all of Jerusalem, and naturally all of Jerusalem would become troubled with him, because whenever Herod was troubled, somebody was going to lose their head. He was a violent man. He killed many of his closest relatives, wives and sons, in order to maintain his power. And so the last thing he wanted was to anybody to usurp his power and throne. One of the places I visited in my trip to the Holy Land was a place in southern Jordan, right at the tip of the country, across from where Jerusalem, where Israel still is. And there's a archaeological area there that's called Petra. And the people that used to live there were called the Nabateans. The Nabateans were contemporaries to the time of Herod and the time of the Romans. It just so happens that one of the biggest tombs at Petra was to a king whose wife was one of Herod's wives, whose daughter was one of Herod's wives. So it is told to us that in this tour, that if these magi came from Persia, they would have come right through this particular area. That would have been their route, because it was a well-traveled route for trade in those days. The second tradition about Epiphany is about the baptism of Christ in the Jordan. This is the Eastern tradition idea. So when they celebrate Epiphany, their story is really the baptism of Christ in the Jordan. And the reason they see that as a manifestation is because it's there that the Trinity is manifested. The Father speaks, the dove comes down, and Jesus is the one baptized by John. And so the Trinity is manifested for the very first time. This manifestation, when it comes to our understanding of Epiphany, we see it as he is manifested in the flesh to the Gentiles for the very first time. The third manifestation or Epiphany story has to do with the wedding feast at Cana, the very first of Jesus' miracles, when he manifests himself as divine because of the miracle that he was able to perform. And the fourth manifestation, or Epiphany, is the one where Jesus goes to the synagogue in Nazareth and proclaims himself to be the Messiah. He says, the good news to the poor, and liberty to captives, and release of prisoners, and to proclaim a year of favor to the Lord. And so we see in these four Epiphanies several different reactions to the manifestation. Yet the manifestation that we see most clearly today and that we think about is those three kings coming and bowing down, prostrating themselves, and doing him homage. So that's the one reaction that we see kind of today. But in the baptism story, what do we see? John is the one who says, I should be baptized by you. That's his reaction. I should be baptized by you. In other words, I am a sinner, and I need you to be my Savior. At Cana, when he revealed himself in that manifestation of the turning the water into wine, his disciples began to believe in him. That was their reaction to that manifestation. And in that same story of the baptism, not the baptism, the synagogue story, you know, the reaction of the people there was they first spoke favorably of him, and then they wanted to take him and throw him off a rock, a mountain, headlong down. They didn't like what he was telling them. So there's lots of reactions to these manifestations, different ways in which people react to it. But the story of Epiphany, as we are celebrating here today with the gospel, gives us three ways to look at this experience of reaction to it. The first reaction was Herod's. Now, Herod, right after this story, goes into a rage and decides to slaughter the children that were born during this period of time. All the male infants, all the male children were to be slaughtered. It was called the slaughter of the innocents. And so his violence against what was manifested there is one reaction. The next reaction comes from the scholars of the law. He calls them in, Herod does, and he says, where is Jesus supposed to be born? Where is this Messiah supposed to be born? And they said, well, it says in the scriptures he's supposed to be born in Bethlehem. But, they didn't care. They just reported the fact. So they kind of ignored the whole thing. They weren't really turned on by the whole thing. And then there's the reaction as we know it from the kings themselves when they come together. They bow down and give him homage. The reality of it is those three reactions are still going on today. The first reaction, when it comes to violence. Pope John Paul II, some years ago, the year 2000, during the Jubilee year 2000, set up a commission called For the New Martyrs of the Great Jubilee. So he wanted to have kind of some facts about what's going on with persecution in the Christian religion today. And after the analysis was done, after the research was done, they basically said that twice as many people have died for the faith in the recent century than did the previous 1900 years of the church. More people have been killed because they are Christians in the past century, twice as many than the previous 1900 years. We think about there was all sorts of martyrdom in the early church. Well, there was, but the numbers pale in comparison to the numbers we're dealing with today. One story in particular that's very recent, the killing of the 29 Coptic Christians in Egypt just a few months ago, or about a year ago, by the Islamic State. These are people on pilgrimage. They were going to the monastery of St. Samuel, about 200 miles south of Cairo. Many of those who were killed were children. And they were categorically called martyrs. Not just killed, but they were killed for the faith, because these Islamic militants asked them, would they reject the Christian faith, and would they make a profession of faith in the Islamic religion? And they all refused. One by one they refused. And each time one refused, they were killed. So this is martyrdom going on today. So that still is a reaction to Jesus. There is the second reaction, which is ignoring him. In a sense, the intellectual world kind of does that. The freedom of thought. People can kind of do it. There's no such thing as truth anymore, even though Jesus says he is the truth. I think there's an intellectual brutality about our Christian faith today. Somehow I think it's just attached to a bunch of wives' tales. And so this intellectual brutality is kind of an ignoring it. It's just, it's not worth becoming a member of that. But hopefully today, when we come to church, it's the reaction of the Magi. That is our reaction. To bow down in homage to Jesus, to believe in him, to do him homage, and to live our lives as Christians. I invite you after Mass to bring your kids up to the crib, because it won't be here next week. We'll be putting it away. And all the figures are there now in one place. And so if you got some little ones, ask them to find the dog that got into a fight and got his ear bit off. So try to find the dog that got his ear bit off, okay? That's one thing you can find over there. And then try to find the one animal that I think is laughing, okay? So watch for the animal that's laughing. So that's a challenge to you kids to have to master.